Hello, how are you today? Welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. I am your host, Shamele. Did you know that Genealogy Quick Start is viewable in many ways? It's viewable on Facebook, it's viewable on YouTube, and it's viewable on PhillyCam. Thank you so much, YouTube subscribers, Facebook followers, and likers. And it's so nice to see you here, PhillyCam viewers. Did you know that this show almost has 1,000 YouTube subscribers? Well, we're not there yet. We're about 55 away. So if you are not subscribed to YouTube, please click that subscribe button. It's red. It's red. And also click the little bell there so that you'll get notifications when the show goes live. So welcome again. It's very nice to have you here. Whether you are live or in replay, please let us know where you are. We love to know where you are. Like one day we might be able to have live shows in a live place. We might come to where you are. So let us know where you are. If you're a proud member of a genealogy group, definitely let us know your group because everybody needs a genealogy home. So today I want to tell you about our show. Oh my gosh, finally, it's been a long time, but I have wanted Rich on this show for a while because Jim said I wanted Rich. I didn't know Rich yet. If you guys saw personally with Rich, you'll know that I don't know the guy, but I've spent just 1 hour with him, and you guys wait till you hear Naturalization Records. He's going to do a quick start on Naturalization Records, and he's also doing something that I really wanted him to do, and we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. Also, we have another episode on estate planning, and it's not, I'm not going to have somebody come in here with like life insurance to help you out. We have our regulars, Jim and Michael, that are going to help you with estate records. Have you looked at estate records? Oh my gosh, my favorite record of all time was this 100-page estate record from 1855. So I'm going to talk to you about that. But first, let me bring on my buddies to help with, did your ancestors do estate planning? First, my buddy Jim Beidler, columnist, editor Jim Beidler, as well as blogger and Mr. Genealogy tip of the day, Michael John Neill. How are you?
I'm good, Shamele. How are you? How are you?
I'm doing good. So what you guys come up with these great ideas. Let's see, we have people here. I'm always ready to jump in and do the genealogy, but first we need to see who we have here. Who's here? Amsterdam, Denise Payne. How are you? Brooke from South Carolina. Wayne from down the street in Magnolia, New Jersey. How are you? Kathy in North Coast, Ohio. I didn't know that was such a thing. Hello, Kathy. Hi, Tina from Wisconsin. We have Maria from Bucks County. We have Rebecca. Too many societies. We love Rebecca. Rebecca is keeping societies alive. Thank you, Rebecca. And then we have Jenny. Hi, Jenny. So today you guys came up with another winner. I absolutely love estate records because it's almost kind of like reading a diary of, what your ancestor was up to. And I'm not going to say this, but Jim has a whole show on that, but we'll talk about that at another time. So why did you guys think that, talking about estate planning was a good idea?
Well, it can really show some good social history, put your ancestors in context. Or sometimes it doesn't, depending on the volume of those estate records, because not all of them are like that 100 pages like you were talking about, Shamele. But if you get lucky, you can find some real gems.
So, Michael, what's so cool about estate records to you?
Well, first of all, they can help clarify some relationships that might not be delineated more clearly in other records. And as Jim said, you can get some social history. You can also get some occupational history. You can get a little better perspective of your ancestors' financial status, unless they made attempts to avoid that, which we'll talk about in one. And there was something else. Oh, you can get just the inventory of the estate, which we're not really talking about today because we're focusing on some other issues. And you may get some clues about family dynamics in your how the estate was handled and what they did to try to deal with some of that. Because as some of you may know, the death of a relative brings out a lot of things.
The best and the worst, right?
Some of that's evidenced in court records.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that's the true reality show. Like everyone acts like, oh, we didn't act like that. Oh my gosh. You start reading those records. Woo.
I've got one family where every time somebody died, they went to court. And it was not pleasant. But that's a topic.
But you have a lot of information on them, don't you? So let's go ahead and get started with, did your ancestor do estate planning? And let us know in the comments, did you find some juicy stuff in your estate records? We definitely would love to know. So let's get started with step 1, which is place and a time.
I mean, that's key, as we're going to see, because a lot of these records, if we're talking about determining ownership and then how that ownership was dispersed amongst the family or the beneficiaries, however it was set up, these are typically local county court records or towns in some cases, but you have got to know the location in order to find these records.
Definitely.
Without that, it's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah, you're not doing genealogy, right? So let's move on to step 2, which is, did they own real property? So Jim, you have this amazing, I love this chain that you gave us. You gave us an upwardly mobile ancestor. So let's take a look at Henry W. Beidler. And so at first, here we are. Talk to us, Jim.
Okay. Well, first of all, this is my great-great-grandfather, Henry W. Beidler. Oh, and not completely off as a tangent, but I recently, the first real DNA interaction I've had with somebody was someone who said, "Oh, by the way, I am a descendant of the illegitimate son of Henry W. Beidler." And when the guy had his stuff spot on, and apparently we had the right amount of common DNA to be half third cousins or whatever we are. So anyway, so that was before Henry got married to Caroline, and 1850 census. He's still relatively young, doesn't have any real property, and this is one of the things. As we were developing the Kickstart, a lot of times the complexity of the estate depends on whether there is real property
or not.
Yeah. Now, he didn't have any in 1850, but let's move on to 1860. And then we find that.
Sorry, my finger is like, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
Okay. I thought maybe you're telling me I'm not talking fast enough. But, so 1860, he now has $9,000 of real property. And what you know, if you do the background research, is right next to him at the very bottom of that is his mother-in-law, Sarah Kinzer, who also has real property. And the implication is that she has kind of set up her daughter-in-law or her daughter and son-in-law with some of her property adjacent to her. So it's looking like it's in his hands. He's going from landless to 9,000 value in 1860. But now, just one slip of the finger here, Shamele. and then we go on to 1870. Now here he's identified as Harry Beidler, but he's up to 65,000.
Holy moly!
In real estate. Now, in part, from having done the deed research on him, yes, he had bought land for sure, but some of that was just increase in value. Land got hot after the Civil War, but he still had quite quite an estate. Now, the unfortunate, now we've shown you the rise, but let me tell you the fall. He dies of
Oh.
typhoid the very next year, 1871. His children are teenagers. What came down through my dad is that basically the sons became drunks. And frittered away. The land had to be sold. It was a quick rise and quick fall, unfortunately.
So I would definitely there's gonna be an episode coming up that's gonna talk about the Beidler house. So I'll definitely let you guys know when that's coming up. It's a fabulous episode. So yeah, oh Jim, I always wondered that story. I'm like, well, what's going on, Jim?
The specific anecdote that my dad related was that they would send the sons with a fattened pig to market and for money, to bring back money, and instead the money got spent on taverns on the road on the way back.
Oh boy, heard that story before. Heard that story. So we have another record here for did they own real property? You want to talk to us about this?
Well, briefly, this was just a reminder. The census is a good clue, to look at the value of the real estate to see if they owned it. But what you really want to do to document that ownership, because you want to see how they acquired it, but in the context of our situation with the estate planning, you want to see how that land was disposed of after they died or right before they died, if they were doing some transactions at that point. But these records that we're talking about, the land records, the deed records, as somebody asked in the comments, these would be local records, typically in the county recorder's office, in the county or the town where the property was located, and that's where you'd want to do that search. And this was just one that I grabbed. I think it's from Colusa County, California.
I take pictures of the spines of books too for my doing my sourcing. But
exactly, it makes the citation easier. But this was a reminder. You've got to be looking in those grantor grantee indexes in the county recorder's office to see what they really owned. If you've got people outside, Jim's examples were from that 1850 to 1860 or 70 time frame where they asked those real property questions. There you go. But a lot of us, if it's before that or after that, you're not going to have a census clue as you would in that time frame. So you want to go to those deeds to document that they did own real property. Because
so if you don't know what Michael's talking about, pick up Christine Rose. One suggestion, and it's at your libraries, almost most libraries, is to take a look at Christine Rose's courthouse research book. And I would definitely suggest you take a look at or this is helpful as well, courthouse indexes, to make sure that you're seeing what you think you're seeing. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Michael.
That's okay, but you want to go through those indexes to make sure you've gotten all those transactions, because some are easy to find, some may not be so easy to find, depending upon what names are on the deed, which we'll hopefully get to here in one of the future upcoming illustrations.
All right, so we have different records that we can look at, as easy as census records to see if your ancestors owned real property. So you want to start there. Then you want to move on to step 3, which is to locate estate records. So let's take a look at what we have here. Let's see, and this looks like a will. So
yep. I contributed my 5th great grandfather, Yost Easter, one of them, his will from 1780. And this is an illustration of 2 things. One, he has several parcels of property, and gives different parcels to different sons, makes allowances for the daughters and his youngest son, to who he didn't get land, but they got some money shares in the estate. And then he goes into much detail as far as his widow's allowance. And this is fairly typical for colonial, post-colonial wills. among the Pennsylvania Germans in Pennsylvania. Oh, and I mean, it's how many bushels of wheat every year she gets, and what rights she has to a house on the property, and in her case, Yost was 70 when he died, 67 when he made his will, 70 when he died. The marker that his wife was considerably younger than him, I think, is in addition to all those staples that he makes sure she gets, he also makes sure that she has access to a good horse for her to ride when she wants to. And I think, I mean, at that point, I thought she probably was younger than him, but this just kind of checked the boxes that he had a younger wife who was still very active. Because if she was in her dotage, I doubt that he'd be supplying the horse for her.
So wait a minute, the horse was really it? That's what clued you into her age?
That kind of it was extra boxes. I mean, I also knew that even though he's born 1710, and the first child that I have recorded is 1754.
Okay.
That probably he married a younger woman, but this was good. Social context.
Makes sense. That's pretty cool. So that was an estate. That was a will. Which could be considered a part of estate records. Also, what else do we have? Did you guys give me something else? Yes.
There should be James, I think.
Let's see. Here we are.
Okay, I'm one step ahead, but this is from 1877.
You're always one step ahead.
I'm always one step ahead, sometimes 3 or 4. This is a clause, and what the individual doing here, he's a German immigrant from Illinois. He's giving his wife the farm for her natural life. And then after her natural life, and another clause, I didn't want to make too much be on the screen at once, it goes to their children. But she can't, because of how he set it up, she can't mortgage it, she can't bequeath it, she can't sell it. All she has to do is pay taxes and maintain it. There are several reasons for doing that. In this family, what I suspect happened is the father who died might have had concerns about what she would do. It turns out that the mother, 5 years after her husband died, she wrote a will bequeathing this property, and she gave it all to one son. And the judge, she died about 30 years later, the judge denied the probate of the will. And the reason he denied the probate of the will was because she didn't have title to that property. Because she had an estate for her natural life, she could not bequeath it. And so the one son to whom she gave it, who was my great-great-grandpa, did not get the entire farm. It went back to how his father had set it up after his mother's death, and the whole family got it. So I've kind of wondered in the back of my head if Mimka, the guy that died, he wanted her to be provided for. He wanted her to have the income from it and all that. But he might have been concerned that my great-great-grandpa perhaps exhibited undue influence on his mother, and this was his way to prevent that from happening.
We are all products of experience.
Interestingly enough, the lawyer wrote both wills. He wrote Mimka's will and he wrote the widow's will later. And my gut tells me he knew she couldn't do it, but he let her write it. It just shut her up. And when she was dead, it all gets sorted. That's my suspicion. It might have been easier than arguing with her. He knew when she was dead, it would be done the way it was supposed to be done. But that, there's we see those things like that, and sometimes there's reasons for them. Sometimes it's to be spiteful, but other times there's valid reasons why someone might set something up like that to protect everybody. And that's what it looks like he did in that case, based on what happened later.
And so much in the will, reading of the will, is that it's like Jim's saying, reading between the lines, trying to understand why it's set up the way that it is.
Because like a lot of other documents, everything is created in the context of the time. And the thing is, we don't always know what that larger context is always.
Yep. Exactly. So you have one more here, which I love. And I
this one we refer. Is this the son-in-law bypass? Yes. This is the son-in-law bypass. And this was a common
son-in-law bypass.
Son-in-law bypass.
And it's not a highway.
It's not a highway, and it's not a football maneuver when the whole family is playing football. But what the James here, this is 1817 in Maryland, he's giving he doesn't give it to his daughter outright, because if he gives this, I think it's 40 or 50 acres, a small tract of land. If he gives it to Nancy outright, at this point in time, her husband, John here, could go to pay his debts. He could mortgage it. It could be sold. So what James does, he gives it essentially to his grandchildren. He appoints his a trusted son-in-law as trustee to oversee it. And so the daughter and the grandchildren get the income from it. And then when the grandchildren are of legal age, the title would go to them directly. So the daughter gets the benefit of it, the income from it, but it keeps the son-in-law from having any access to it. Of course, there never would be a family today that would have these kinds of issues. This is all just things from the ancient past.
Of course, this doesn't happen today.
But the thing is, when we see some of these things, and it might look odd to us on the surface, but some of these things that do look odd was at the time maybe the only legal way they had son-in-law bypass or whatever. Today there might be a different way there's different ways to set that up. But in 1812 in Maryland, I'm assuming James went to the lawyer or the JP and said, this John guy, I never liked him. I never trusted him. Whatever his issues are, I don't want him having it. I can just see, a father being that way about his son-in-law, perhaps. And so the JP said, well, Mr. Rampley, here's what you're going to have to do. You have one of them you trust? I got 6 daughters. This is the one I trust. Whatever the case may be. And so that was the workaround for it.
He earned his money. I love that. You can marry him, but he's not getting his claws on my money.
Right. That daughter got her property outright, but not the one we talked about in the illustration.
So those are estate records. Let's see if anybody had any questions about the estate records. Anything? Did you guys see anything in there? Let's see. Anything.
Those would be.
Hey, Angela from Houston.
Those would be testate records where there's a will.
Yes. So are we talking about that, or let's move on? Are we talking about wills versus no wills?
I think no wills is coming up.
Okay.
As an example of that.
So let's now go to after you've looked at all the estate records, which is pull everything that you can from the county. Then you want to do step 4, which is locating non-estate records. So what do you mean when you say non-estate records?
In a lot of counties, these are all in the same place. The estates include the testate cases and the intestate cases. The intestate ones are where there is no will. But when there is no will, then state statute often dictates a significant part of what is to happen if there is no valid will, in terms of how the inheritance is to go. If there's a will, then the will would dictate that, as in the example Jim and I had earlier. But if there's no valid will that's submitted to the probate court, then state statute dictates what happens to the property, which is why individuals have wills, to avoid, particularly if they don't like what would happen if they don't have one, they write one, or you should, or your ancestors should have.
Yeah. And going back to that first fork in the road about whether they have real property or not, we have an example here that is a case where there was no will. This is Samuel Rhodes in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And especially as you get more landless people in the 19th century, the statute in Pennsylvania was if the estate is under a certain dollar value, and almost always these are ones where there is no real estate involved, where it's just personal property, as long as that's under a certain value, the widow just gets it all. And this is a case of that. It even marks no real estate, and it's under the allowance set by the General Assembly, so the widow gets it. And this is a pretty simple. It was meant to be a simplified procedure that they don't have to go through the inventory, they don't have to go through the accounting, and the widow doesn't have to share it with the kids.
Right. In many states, that when there was a lot of personal property, state statute, especially as Jim mentioned, 19th century, mid-19th century, and afterwards, state statute would dictate what was called the widow's award. Personal property, If there was real estate, if there was some, but if there was just personal property, state statute would dictate specific items she was to have, or a cash equivalent if there were not those items. And you'd have to refer to contemporary state statute to see what those items or those amounts were. But that often referred to as the widow's award.
And if this is, if it's a family, one of those rare families that everybody got along, but yeah, or at least reasonably got along.
My family gets along. What are you talking about, rare?
Okay, Shamele, yeah, whatever you say. Or at least they weren't overly disputatious. They probably, the widow's allowance might have been up to, say, $20,000, which was a lot of value at the time. But nobody was doing an accounting. So unless somebody got their nose out of joint about it, they just kind of wink and say, "Oh yeah, it's under the 20,000. She takes it." Yep. So, anyway.
So I was watching this awful show called I Care a Lot. It's a movie. And it's like these wealthy people, and people come in and become their guardians and like suck them dry because they don't have kids or whatever. So what happens if somebody dies and they don't have any heirs? Does the state just get woohoo? Do they have a party?
If they have no heirs, it will escheat to the state. That's what happens. And I have a relative that happened to him in Virginia about 1810. And he had no, I'm going to keep this super short so we stay on time. But what happened was he had natural children. This is Virginia, 1810 era. He had four natural children with a woman he lived with for some time, but they were natural children who were not immediately heirs. And this dude had no relatives in the United States. And so because those natural children were not his heirs, the real estate that he had escheated to the state.
Escheated. That's what the word is, cheated.
That's a whole nother show, but that's what would happen.
Let's do a whole nother show.
Yes, we do have to do a show on that. Yeah.
This is a court case from 1908 in Illinois, and I'm going to try to keep this within our time frame here. But what happened was this individual, he and his wife had no children, and he died in 1908. She survived him, and again, it goes back to contemporary state statute. Contemporary state statute in Illinois at this point in time said this is what is to happen. And the widow had to file a partition suit because the essence of what went on here was when James died, his wife had a right to some property, but then his biological heirs, his siblings and some nieces and nephews, would inherit the rest of it. And so because he had no will, if he'd had a will, this might not have happened. And so what they did was she had to sue all her in-laws. Can you imagine that scenario? She had to sue all her in-laws to get the title cleared up after he died. And as the 4 bullet points point out, they went along with state statute. She was to get a homestead. There was a couple 300 acres, if memory serves. She was to get a homestead worth $1,000. Then after that, she was to get her dower interest. This was a point in time where the dower interest was still a thing. So 1/3 of the remainder. And then after that, and genealogy is about fractions because you see all these fractions that are coming in. Yeah. And then after that point in time, she was to get a half of what was left over after the dower had been set aside. And then the rest of that went to her in-laws, her husband's 3 siblings and the descendants of another one. And they were supposed to partition it. In theory, neighbors were going to go out and they say, here's what the widow gets and here's what these other gets. Well, the problem is it's rough property. It's not flat farmland where you could just mark it out like that. And so when that happens, it gets sold. And so there was a sale of the real estate. This is a copy of the sale bill that was in. This was not, we talked about probate records. This was not a probate case. This was a circuit court case because she was filing a case against her in-laws. So it was not probate. It was in the Chancery Court.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So that's step 4. Step 5 is then to analyze documents. So you guys talked a lot as we went through about analyzing, looking to see what looks a little out of place. Do you guys have any other quick tips that you haven't shared already that you'd like to say about analyzing these documents, the estate and the non-estate documents?
I would say 2 main things. Number 1, make sure you've gotten all the possible records. If they own real estate in particular, deeds of acquisition, any deeds where it's disposed. If you've got an intestate case, especially like the one we saw here, where there's all this happens and that happens and that happens, you might want to refer to contemporary state statute to see what happens, particularly when somebody dies without a will, because these documents will not say, they'll just do it the way they're supposed to do it. They will not say, well, we're doing this first because it says. And then they don't quote section and all the code. They just do it.
And records of administration and court records when they're intestate, you got to just grab everything, right?
And you got to look at the non-probate court records, especially if there was a fight.
Love fights.
Of course, Shamele never has any of these. Apparently,
no, yeah, I don't have any fights. I'm sorry.
But some of us, we have a lot of these. And so if there was a fight over the property, even a friendly fight, as sometimes happens, they would have to file a suit in court to settle up the title. Not in the probate court in many cases, locations.
All right, so that's the quick start for did your ancestors do estate planning? Step 1 is, of course, determine a place and time. Step 2, did they own real property? Step 3, locate estate records. Step 4, locate those non-estate records. And then step 5, analyze records. So that is the quick start for did your ancestors do estate planning? Jim, Michael, thank you so much. See you guys on the other side. All right, next up, we have our special guest on Naturalization Records. Long awaiting, like I'm just like, is he going to be there when I press the button? Because I've wanted Rich to be on for a while. Beidler wanted me to have Rich on, but I wanted Rich too. Here he is. Almost. Are you there? Wait. Add you. Rich.
I was thinking about running out of the room when you said, oh, is he going to be there? Let's just see what he would do.
That would have definitely freaked me out. I could tell you're Beidler's friend because he would think of something like that.
How are you?
I'm good. It's so nice to have you on here.
Glad to be here.
And you are like, I hear rave reviews about you and naturalization and immigration all the time. I think you do a course on this, or you have courses coming in the future wherever they're not currently at. So if you love Rich, like I'm sure you will, you can spend a whole week with him sometime in the future. Right, Rich?
Sure can.
And I'm not supposed to do that. That's my own show rule. And see what he does to me? I get all messed up. All right, Rich, let's go ahead and do your quick start that you created for Naturalization Records.
Great.
So for step 1, you said choose the ancestor, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at who you chose. I love old pictures. I love old pictures. Thank you for playing with me because Michael and Jim didn't give me any pictures this week. But that's okay because I still love them too. Who is this guy?
So this is my maternal great-grandfather, my mother's father's father, Biagio Camperlino. And this is one of those, like old photos that they then kind of painted over. So it's like a portrait, but not exactly.
I have one of these. I was wondering why they looked like that. I forgot to ask Maureen Taylor about that. So after you choose the ancestor, next step 2, is to then search records for a naturalization date. So, of course, our favorite record. Talk to us about naturalizations and the census records.
Sure. So when we talk about naturalizations, we're talking about records of citizenship, right? So people that immigrated to this country from somewhere else and trying to figure out when and where they became a citizen. And so my great-grandfather was born in Italy, and we find him here on the 1920 census, where it lists him as PA, which means he's filed his first papers to become a citizen, declaration of intent. And so, we have a couple of options of records like this where, if we want to try and pin down a more exact date of naturalization, the 1900 through 1940 censuses all list whether or not somebody was naturalized. So in this case, in the 1920 census, as of, the date of this census, I can't remember if it's January or April or June. We can look at if we looked at the top, it would tell us. But supposedly, as of this date, he told the census enumerator that he'd started his process to become a citizen.
Okay, so fantastic. So the census records, perfect place to try to narrow in on that date. Um, Here we know he was born in Italy. And then you have another record here. Did you want me to go back to that, Rich?
No, I was just saying January 17th, 1920 was the date that was enumerated.
So the draft cards too, they help you out?
Yeah, so the draft card is another option of a record that may give you information about naturalization status. Now, this is exclusively the World War I draft cards. The World War II draft cards generally don't include naturalization status. So here we see that he's listed as an alien and as a non-declarant. And the date is not actually on this record, so it's not a great example, but it's from 1918. Okay. And we can then theorize, okay, so seemingly between 1918 and 1920, he started that process to become a citizen.
Okay. So
I was going to say there's also some other records, some places like New York City, for instance, has voter registration lists. There's a couple of different records that may give you information about whether or not somebody's a citizen, and that can help you further determine a time frame in which you want to look for records.
And what are some of those records off the top?
So like I said, we've got the censuses, we've got the World War I draft cards, we've got voter registrations in some places. This gets a little granular, but in some places only citizens could own land, for instance, or only citizens could take out a homestead, for instance. So if you understand the land laws at the time, you might be able to theorize whether or not someone was already a citizen. Sometimes you also get naturalization information annotated on ship manifests. This is usually for arrivals after about 1905, 1906. Okay. So you might be able to look at those types of records as well for some hints about potential naturalization timeframes.
Fantastic. So many records. So now you've searched all these different records to try to narrow in on a date. And so now you want to go to step 3, which is to locate, see if you can find something online. So you gave us this long one. I didn't know all these pages. Let's take a look at your great-grand's records here. So talk to us about what this. So this is the whole file here?
Right. So this is the whole court copy of the file.
Okay.
So in this case, we have 6 pages. The first 2 here are his statement of facts for petition for naturalization. You don't often find this, but in this case for this court, they did retain these. And this was basically like he could take this home, so he knew exactly what questions he was going to be asked or that he was going to need to prepare for the petition. So that way, he would know everything he needed, ship and date of arrival, kids' information, exact place of birth, occupation, residence, all that kind of good stuff.
Ah, what's this here? Oh, this is him as well.
So this is his declaration of intention. That's his first paper. And if we look at the date, we see it's April of 1919. So between that 1918 draft card and the 1920 census. And then there's also there a certificate of arrival, which started in the early 1900s. The naturalization laws changed in the early 1900s, and they required that individuals provided proof of lawful entry. But this is one of the reasons that ship manifests started to get annotated. And in this case, this is what the port would have sent to the courthouse to specify that, yes, indeed, we found his lawful arrival, and here's the information about it to include in his records.
Wow, this is great. All of this is in one location.
Yeah, now, of course, your mileage may vary on these. You don't always get all of these records. There's a lot of different reasons why sometimes certain things exist and other ones don't. Here we have his petition for naturalization, which was in 1921. Okay.
So, Rich, question, you said that this isn't normal that they would all be kind of, every naturalization doesn't have all these records. Are the records possibly dispersed in other areas? Like if you get the declaration of intent, should you continue to search for these other records in other areas, or maybe they're just not extant?
So that's a kind of complicated question. Just because somebody files a declaration of intent, starts the process, doesn't mean they ever finish it. Mm-hmm. If you find a record of a petition for naturalization It should include the declaration of intention if they needed to file one. Sometimes you didn't. If you were married to a citizen, if you'd fought in one of the wars, if you were here for 3 years as a minor before you turned 21. So there's a lot of different reasons why somebody might have what's called a one-paper naturalization, which would just be that petition. Those statement of facts that we saw, you don't really often find. Each court kind of sometimes kept records and sometimes didn't. But usually, if you find naturalization records online, what's there is going to be what's available. It's not likely that you're going to find the petition online, but then somewhere in some courthouse, there's also, you know, these statement of facts. Like usually, if it's there, it's online. If it's not there, then
if it's in there, it's there. All right. All right. You have another online naturalization that you want to share.
Yeah. So the one that we just saw was from the U.S. District Court of the Western District of PA, which is in Pittsburgh, where I live for the next 2 days. And then that was on Ancestry. It's also on Family Search and a couple of other online places. And here is another example of an online naturalization record, also from Ancestry, from the U.S. District Court of the Western District of Washington at Tacoma. And this is a kind of unique one because it's actually a father naturalizing his minor child. So the laws change consistently over time. This is a 1950s naturalization, and starting with this big immigration and naturalization law in 1952, an adult could petition on behalf of their minor child. And so that's what this is an example of.
Very interesting. Did not know this. Wow.
And this guy and his child are actually also from the Philippines, which is very interesting because that had been under US rule for a while. So there's also a lot of complicated things happening in the Philippine Islands at that time, whether or not folks were considered citizens. So naturalization it's complicated. We could talk for hours all about the different intricacies.
So I've been trying, Rich, for the longest time to really get my feet wet and just try to understand naturalization. And I'm just really happy that you said that, because it is this hodgepodge of, you know, you never know what you might find. You never know where you might need to look for it. And when you find it, wow. So, how do people, we have some tips at the very end on how people can maybe wrap their heads around it, but you have another really good example and it has a picture on it. I love pictures.
So this actually should be locate offline naturalization records.
Yes, we're now offline. So this is step 5, which is to search for offline. So where did you get this offline? Oops.
So after starting in September of 1906, one copy of the petition, the declaration, if there was one, and the certificate of naturalization went to the government. It's the agency that became the INS, which is now USCIS. So starting in 1906, they have the governmental copy of all naturalization related paperwork. Only 2 copies of the certificates were ever made. One went with your immigrant ancestor home to prove that they were citizen, and the other one went to the government. So if you don't have a copy of the certificate in your family holdings, you can write to USCIS to get a copy of the certificate. Starting in 1929, they have photos on them as well. So here's an example of Eva Porta, who naturalizes in the 1950s in California. And as we can see, it has a nice little photo of her there as well.
I love this. I love this. Zoom in. And we get to see her actual writing, which is, I love signatures and stuff. Scar on forehead and nose. That's a story. Oh, I love that. All right. Here's another offline one.
Yeah. So
and where did you get this one?
So this is a relative of mine. She's my great-grandmother's sister. This was obtained at the New Jersey State Archives in Trenton, New Jersey. So the Hudson County Court of Common Pleas in Jersey City, which is where all my family immigrated to, their records are held in Jersey City, and a copy of those records is also at the New Jersey State Archives. So none of those county court records are online after 1906. But in this case, I could go down to Trenton, look up the microfilm reel, and obtain this record, which you see here. So in this case, we get her certificate of arrival and then her petition for naturalization. Now, she doesn't have a declaration, the first paper, because her husband was a US citizen. So she didn't have to take that first step. The laws changed in the 1920s in terms of whether or not a woman would become a citizen when her husband did. So starting in 1922, most women, all women had to sort of do the citizenship process on their own, but they were allowed to do it in a kind of expedited fashion if their spouse was a US citizen.
So I heard that at some point that there was a reversal of citizenship if a woman married an alien. Was that true?
Yeah. So the very, very short history is that, so from 1855 to 1922, if a woman marries a US citizen man, or if the woman who is married to a man that becomes a US citizen, the woman becomes a US citizen automatically. She's not necessarily listed on the paperwork. She's good to go. Starting in 1907, the Congress passed a law that said if an American woman, whether she's American born or she's naturalized, by virtue of her father or something, if she marries a foreign man who is not a US citizen, she would lose her US citizenship. Even if she never left the country, she didn't have to do anything other than get married. So between 1907 and 1922, there was this reversal as well, that if an American woman married an alien man, she would lose her citizenship. And that actually continued until 1931 if she married an Asian man, because Asians were considered racially ineligible at that time for citizenship, and they couldn't actually naturalize until the 40s and 50s.
Wow. So there's a lot of those naturalization kind of records I saw at the National Archives in Philly, and it has lots of pictures of Chinese immigrants, which was amazing. I wanted to be Chinese like right then, because it was just like, I want this to be my ancestor. It was all this great information.
Yeah, there's some really, because immigration was so restricted for certain ethnicities and people from certain countries, there can be really thick immigration files because they wanted documentation, they wanted paperwork. When you file stuff with the government, like, it's never easy. It's never just a form. There's 25 things you got to fill out. You got to send your photo and your thumbprint and all this stuff. And so think about that from like 100 years ago. There might be some of those types of records for your family members. And it's hard to think about because, they would have had a difficult time, getting here. But, where our research is all the richer because of that documentation that now exists.
Oh my God, I love it. The more difficult it was for your ancestor, the better it is for you, right? Because all those
You can say that, yeah.
So, Rich, I want to thank you for sharing your quick start. I want to do two things. I want to go through the list. And then I want to share, you provided a list of something that'll help people to kind of wrap their heads around immigration research. So first, let's look at his list of, quick start for naturalization records. So step one is to first, oh shoot, I didn't change this one. Sorry. I'm going to... It wasn't me. It was my assistant. I'm going to have to get a new assistant. They did not change that. So step one, you have to choose an ancestor. Always remember that really cool picture. What's your ancestor's name again? I meant to practice my Italian.
Biagio Camperlino.
Biagio. You remember that picture of Biagio. You first have to find your Biagio. Then you need to search for naturalization record for the date. Look at what you already have.
Right.
Pull the date out of there so that you know where to go to start locating online naturalization records. Where are the best places to go online to search for naturalization records?
Family Search is great. Ancestry is great. Find My Past has some. Fold3 has some. All the big players have at least some naturalization records, some which are replicated in some places and others which you can only get in one of those places.
All right, you got to search all of the big guys. Step 4 is to locate online naturalization records, and step 5 is to locate offline records. Because guess what? There are offline records. Everything's not online. Everything's not online. So, you know, I was just talking to you about how hard I felt it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around immigration. And so you came up with your top 3 books on naturalization and immigration. So talk to us about these books. Why do you think these books are so great?
So most of my books are already in Philly, but I still have this one in Pittsburgh because I use it so much.
Hold on, let me get close so people can see the cover.
This is the Guide to Naturalization Records of the United States by Christina Schaefer. It is like the Naturalization Records Bible because it tells she went all over the country to figure out where the records are. It was published in 1997, so before a lot of the stuff was online, but this is great because it can tell you, you know, where you need to be looking for records from certain places. I believe it's out of print, but you can usually get a used copy online somewhere. It's excellent. I use it all the time.
I'm getting that one. You sold me. You sold me. Oh, and I'm not telling anybody to get any books. I'm just suggesting that these might be good references for you.
Sure, absolutely. And then They Became Americans by Lou Zukes is a great book. Again, published in the late 90s, but the information is wonderful. So some of the information about exactly like where things are might have changed a little bit, but it gives you a great idea of what some of those records look like. And, you know, in some cases, it'll still be accurate about where to find them and how to request them.
Great, great, great. So I hope that you guys, I feel like I can maybe like find some folks and do a little immigration project, Rich. Thank you for getting me started on immigration. And let's bring our buddies back so we can wrap this up with our question of the day. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Let's see if
I didn't know there was going to be a quiz today.
There is a quiz. There is a quiz. And I want everyone, because you know I'm all about putting it out there in the universe because that is how we get what we want. So how many of you guys love flea markets? I am so excited. I don't need for the weather to break to start going to flea markets. Rich knows that around here, we go flea market on Thanksgiving Day. We go flea marketing in coats and gloves, hats and scarves. And so Rich, I found out, has family that lives near my favorite flea market. And when I go to the flea market, I go with a list. Like some people go to stroll, I go with a list. And one thing that I always see is like these old pictures. And I see like things that I think about, oh, my great grandmom, she had, you know, an ice cream maker like that. So for your ancestors, like you're at the flea market, Michael, you love flea markets, right? Pretend you love flea markets.
That's debatable.
So let's pretend Michael loves flea markets. What ancestral item would you like to find while you are browsing through a flea market? Or what might you be looking for?
You want me to go first? I'm not sure. I have been known to go in antique stores, so I might address it from that
standpoint. The antique store.
I think the one thing I know I'll never find it. I have a forebear who was a Cooper. He died in 1880 something. And I've always thought it'd be so cool to find a barrel that I knew was his because he'd put in his name on the metal strip. But that's probably never going to happen. But I thought that's
wait, whoa, Michael! We're supposed to put it out to the
I know we're supposed to put it out there, but
allow it to percolate. We don't just shoot it down.
I buy nature and inherently negative. So I'd like to find one, but I'm kind of doubtful it's out there. But I do have something I did find real quickly. I have an immigrant trunk from my great-great-grandfather's sister.
Cool.
An antique dealer emailed me. She had bought it. Great-great-aunt's name is stenciled on it, huge. And she Googled the name and she found my webpage and she said, do you know this woman? And I kind of vagued an answer because I was thinking she sees dollar signs in her head if I know this is my aunt. So I said, I'll have to look. And paid a couple $100, but it's the trunk that great Aunt Ancha had about 1879 or so when she emigrated. So that I did find that it wasn't a flea market, but an
But
antique
that's
dealer.
pretty cool. Jim or Rich?
I must do that. I'd love that because so many of my ancestors came in the early 1900s, as late as like the early 1920s, and so stuff like that could still exist. It didn't come down in our family, but who knows? I mean, I'd love to find a trunk.
The weird thing about it was it had wheels on the bottom. It was painted. I haven't had it refinished. It was painted bright red on the inside because it had been used apparently as a toy box. It was wrapped in burlap when this lady purchased it.
How cool!
That's super cool. Jim, you have anything you'd like to find?
Hands down, it would be a Proctor baptismal certificate of my 5 great-grandfather, Johannes Kramer. I know it exists because I've seen a photocopy of it, but it's somewhere out there. Yeah, because the photocopy I got via a Proctor expert, she said, well, it was at this dealer 10 years ago. And I went to that dealer, and he's one of these guys that doesn't keep good records. So he doesn't know what happened to it, but it's out there somewhere. Because this is a decorative Proctor from the Reverend Daniel Schumacher, who was like the to die for early Proctor artist. So,
wow.
Universe.
Yes, that's University. At least Jim's positive. Jim, you're going to find it. It's going to come to you. For me, I would like to. When we lived in this apartment, we had a shared storage area, and for some reason, my baby pictures were down there, and someone stole all the stuff out of there. So my baby pictures are gone. And so when I'm at flea markets and I see old pictures, so if you guys see any old pictures of little black girls, send them to me because it might be me. Everyone, thank you so much. Rich, you were a treasure. I've learned so much from you. And Michael and Jim, I'm always learning from you guys.
Thank you.
Audience, thank you so much for being here with us today. Have a fantastic day. And Rich,
Thank you, Shamele.
Bye. If I could find the button, there it is.